In this video, we're talking about how Valve was right about all these new chips hitting the market. Then we're going to talk about some games that Digital Foundry highlighted that are too big for the Steam Deck and why that's a little bit of a problem. And finally, we're going to talk about this new malware problem on Steam that I don't really think is all that big of a deal. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about the Steam Deck. It's where I round up all the biggest Steam Deck news a couple times a week. It's basically a video podcast. So if that sounds good to you, subscribe and set your notifications to all. But yeah, let's jump into this first news story here that's about Valve being right about all of these new chips hitting the market. We've got the Z2 Go, we've got the Z1 Extreme, and a lot of people have posited these as Steam Deck killers, right? If you look at the ROG Ally and Ally X, even the Legion Go to some extent, there are some games like Space Marine 2, for example, that run really well on these new chips on Windows, but then when you throw them at the Aerith chip in the Steam Deck, they don't run nearly as well, probably about by like half, I would say. And what I mean by that is, like, if you played Space Marine 2 on the Ally and the Steam Deck, you'd get like 40 to 50 FPS at the same settings on the Ally that you would get 20 FPS on with the Steam Deck. So like, it's about double the performance. So I guess that's 100% better. I don't know. You guys know the numbers. You always tell me in the comments. The point is, some games run better on these Windows devices using these newer chips than they do on the Steam Deck using an older chip. And now we're at an interesting point because SteamOS is branching out. It's coming to different hardware. We've got the Ally, we've got the Legion Go S. That's coming out at the end of May, around May 25th. They've got the $500 version that comes with the Z2 Go. I would skip that. It doesn't perform nearly as well as the Steam Deck with SteamOS. Then, interestingly, they're not doing a Z2 regular or Z2 Extreme. There's a Z1 Extreme option that will run better than the Z2 Go, but that one jumps up to over $700. I would skip that. Then you've got the Ally and the Ally X. Those are getting SteamOS soon, and the Fox was actually able to get an early build of the SteamOS version that's coming to the Ally. I think it's like 3.8 or something like that. And the results he got were pretty interesting. For the most part, it ran about as well, if not slightly better than the Steam Deck, but it did get better performance at around 15 watts of TDP, which is good for battery life. But at the end of the day, all that extra performance you get out of the Z1 Extreme, it isn't really showing up all that well on paper, at least with this early version of SteamOS that's shipping for the ROG Ally. And I was thinking about it in bed last night, actually, when I was playing Atomfall on my Steam Deck. It really just goes to show that Valve was right about all of these new chips. They've been saying that there is going to be a Steam Deck 2. I obviously believe them. I know everyone hates when you talk about the Steam Deck 2, but I don't think it's that far down the pike when it really comes to when this thing's going to come out. But the biggest reason they're holding off as long as possible is they want a generational increase in battery life and performance. They want it to be an actual Steam Deck 2 versus something like the Ally to the Ally X, where you get a little bit better performance, but it's not really enough to make you go out and buy one if you already bought the regular ROG Ally. I mean, you could say the same thing about the Steam Deck to the Steam Deck OLED. Like, if you have an LCD, you're going to get like marginally worse performance than the OLED. The only reason I would say the OLED is worth upgrading to is for the OLED screen and the overall better build quality of the handheld. But it's not like a generational upgrade, which is exactly what they're looking for. And now that we have SteamOS running on these new handhelds, I would assume that the battery life situation that we've seen with the Ally and the Ally X, i.e. the battery life is garbo, is going to continue at least a little bit when it comes to running SteamOS on these devices. It's like the chips are just too powerful for the batteries that are in these handhelds, and you can't really beat that with hardware optimization or software optimization. Like, even if you're running the chip at a lower TDP, even though it is stronger, it's still going to come out in the wash in the terms of performance because it's going to run about as well as the Steam Deck and probably get similar battery life. And at that point, why would you want to upgrade to that device in the first place? It would really be a side grade from the Steam Deck at that point. And if you're going out and buying one of these things, I would guess that the one you want to buy is the one that you're getting from the people making the operating system, right? Like the reference device, the Steam Deck, that would be the one to buy, especially considering the fact that at the end of the day, it is a lot cheaper. And if you are looking at all of these devices that do run SteamOS, I would assume that the one most people want to buy is the one directly from the manufacturer or the designer of the software, because even if, you know, they update SteamOS and you get the updates across all the devices that support it, they're obviously going to put a little bit more time, effort, and care into the Steam Deck. Whether they're doing it on purpose or not, that's the device they know the best. That's the one that they've spent more than 3 years working on to try and figure out how to get it as finely tuned as possible. So they're going to get better performance out of that thing with these updates, regardless of how soon they push them to other devices. But the interesting thing is that might work a little bit of vice versa with these handhelds, like with Windows, where when SteamOS is done and it's on these other handhelds, handhelds and you can install it on any machine you want. That's the time when Valve said they're going to introduce dual booting with Windows 11, right? Like they don't want you dual booting on a piece of software, aka SteamOS, because if they introduce dual booting too early, they could just break it over and over again. It's one more thing to worry about when they're pushing out updates, which would slow down the update push out time. So like they probably just don't want to deal with that until it's officially done. And then all of the updates they're going to do from that point forward are just smaller quality of life or performance related things that aren't going to blow the entire system up when you have dual booting supported on the handheld. But when they do introduce dual booting and you are able to install Windows to play games like Warzone or Call of Duty or Battlefield 1 or, you know, any game with anti-cheat like Grand Theft Auto Online, because they've focused so much on getting SteamOS working so great on this handheld, I mean, they clearly haven't really figured out how to get Windows up to snuff with the amount of performance they've been able to pull on the Linux side of things. But when it comes to these other handhelds like the Legion Go S, the Legion Go, the ROG Ally, the Ally X, those were designed with Windows in mind. When you're on Windows on those handhelds, they have their own launchers. You've got Armory Crate on the Asus side, you've got the Legion Go's version of it from Lenovo, and you get special driver updates from AMD that work specifically for that chip and give it the best performance possible. And that means when you install Windows as well as SteamOS, you're going to get a great experience both ways. And Valve, they've done a decent job getting the drivers out there so you can use things like the speakers or the graphics drivers for the actual Steam Deck with Windows 11. But I mean, comparing apples to apples, they've done a worse job, I would say, than the other manufacturers have with Windows, just because it's not the main platform that they've been supporting with these things from the beginning. But yeah, speaking of games running on the Steam Deck, that brings me to the second news story here, which is an interesting video I just watched on Digital Foundry. It's kind of become a series where they go too big for the Steam Deck and they just try out various games. This video is interesting because a lot of the games that they deemed good enough on the Steam Deck, they make a lot of sacrifices to get them to run that I personally wouldn't want to make. Like at that point, I would just play them on my main gaming PC. They started out with God of War Ragnarok, for example, and that's one where I'm like split a little bit down the middle because it uses FSR 3.1 in performance mode. And I don't know if you've ever tried that. Even with the upgrades that FSR 3.1 got, performance mode is not all that great. You can see a lot of just blockiness, some muddiness. It looks more painter-like, I would say, than I'd probably want on a handheld, especially with a game that looks as good as God of War Ragnarok. And I think the reason they did that is because they wanted to get as many frames as possible out of the game, so it was running between 40 and 50 FPS. But like, wouldn't it be better to just, you know, run it at 30 FPS, you know, equivalent to like a PS4, like how we ran the first God of War back when that came out around the same time as the Steam Deck? I feel like that's the smarter thing to do. Like go for a low medium preset, use FSR 3.1 at balanced or quality mode, and just go for a locked 30 FPS across the board. It runs at 30 FPS on the PS4, and honestly, I think that's good enough, especially on a handheld. It's a Souls-like kind of with its combat, but it's not anything so crazy where you need that double frame rate or even 40 FPS, but could be wrong there. Another game they deemed playable was Metaphor ReFantazio. I got to admit, I was a little out of the loop with this game. I just assumed it would run excellently because of how great Persona 5 Royal and Persona 3 Reload run on the Steam Deck, but apparently it has some trouble when you're outside of dungeons. Like when you get into a town, no matter what settings you're using, it'll drop below 30 FPS. They call it playable. I guess technically that's playable, but like in a game that's using PS3 graphics tech, I feel like you should be able to push out a version on PC that's not going to be hammered so hard when you're in a town. Like I feel like 30 FPS is a fine benchmark even at high settings with that game. I mean, it looks good. It looks very equivalent to something like Fire Emblem Awakening to me in its art style, but like it should be running a little bit better. Just more of the same from these Japanese developers like the ones behind Rise of the Ronin, where that game also looks like PS3 tech but runs terribly on PC and can barely run on the Steam Deck. And after that, they just moved right on into games that can't run. They checked on Final Fantasy 16 and apparently that one's having some trouble. That doesn't bug me so much. Like that makes a little bit of sense. There's some crazy graphics tech being pushed in that game and it was not released on the PlayStation 4. Like when you're in the icon fights and you're flying all over the map as a kaiju, I just think that's too big to cram down onto the Steam Deck's little APU, and it kind of makes sense why that game doesn't run. But interestingly, it does run pretty well when you're in battles in the overworld. It's just when you're in the big icon fights or, you know, you're in a town or there's a lot of NPCs running around, it doesn't work all that well. They also tested out Horizon Forbidden West, which was interesting to me because I thought that game would run fine because it also came out on PlayStation 4, but they pointed out that the Steam version, the complete edition that you can buy on PC, is actually the PS5 code, and that kind of pushes it over the Steam Deck's limit. But that was interesting on another level for me because my buddy Timo over at overkill.wtf, he put out some graphic settings to get a hard lock 30 FPS without sacrificing a ton of performance and graphics. So like, I feel like it can be done, so maybe they just need to test that one a little bit further. Black Myth Wukong is another one that I'm pretty sure they said was not playable, and that's interesting to me and kind of vindicating because when it came out, I was like, oh man, this is climbing the charts on the Steam Deck. Obviously, it was a huge game, so if you only have a Steam Deck, that's where you're going to play it, but I just assumed it wouldn't run all that well because it doesn't run all that well on PS5 and it has stuttering issues on PC, but it looks like people are just brute forcing their way through it, so it is playable at the end of the day. It just might be a little big for the Steam Deck itself. And finally, they rounded it out with Dragon's Dogma 2. That game doesn't run well on my 4090 PC at like high settings. I can't get a lock 60 out of it even when I'm in towns. It's hammering the CPU. So even at 800p at low settings, I wasn't expecting much. And yeah, it still doesn't run all that well on the Steam Deck. But the larger point of this is I don't know how much the problem is the Steam Deck's hardware when you look at all of these games. I mean, God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West excluded, a lot of the games that were highlighted are just poorly optimized PC ports or even console ports. Like Black Myth Wukong had major performance problems on the PlayStation 5 when it came out. It still does to this day. It had major performance problems on PC. It still does to this day. Dragon's Dogma 2, as I just said, is a complete mess on both console and PC. They stopped updating it. It hasn't gotten performance updates in a long time. Same situation with Monster Hunter Wilds. It's just another unoptimized port from Capcom. So yeah, when you look at videos like this, I don't really want to blame Valve too much. Like I think there is a need for a more powerful Steam Deck, obviously, because developers just aren't optimizing their games. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I don't pre-order anything. I don't play anything day one. I either wait for Alex's Digital Foundry breakdown or I wait for someone to upload some gameplay with a similar graphics card to mine to see how the game is going to run. But more times than not, if I see a game is using Unreal Engine 5, not only will I not play it on the Steam Deck, I won't buy it on PC either. I bought Silent Hill 2 for full price at launch. It's one of my favorite games ever, and I thought the remake was going to be good based on reviews, but there's an endemic problem where if the game is good enough, performance problems just don't make their way into reviews. And I'd consider the Unreal Engine 5 performance problems of Silent Hill 2 making the game borderline unplayable. Once you notice stutter, you can't not see it, and they've done nothing to fix it. It's not just the borderline unnoticeable traversal stutter that you'd see in like RoboCop Rogue City either. It stutters constantly. Like there's so many tiles that you travel between that you're always seeing stutters, kind of similar to Dead Space Remake. And to me, that's just unplayable. So until developers kind of go out of their way to actually finish their games and optimize them before release, that's what's driving the need for better hardware. And I don't think we're going to win that battle because we've been complaining about stuttering and bad PC ports forever. And even when they add more PC gamers month over month, it doesn't seem to fix the ports that come out because even a huge game like Monster Hunter Wilds has massive performance problems no matter what hardware you play it on. And finally, let's talk about this malware problem that's allegedly kind of infesting Steam. So it's coming up on like Forbes and a bunch of other websites where they're like, Steam has a massive malware problem. They need to figure this out now. They need to ban these games. And like, I don't want to be mean, but they're like the equivalent of the movies The Asylum makes, where like if a new movie's coming out in theaters, like Snakes on a Plane, for example, which came out in 2007, don't know where I pulled that from, The Asylum would make Snakes on a Train. Then when your mom would take you to Blockbuster, you'd be like, oh, can you rent me Snakes on a Plane? She'd go in, she'd scan the shelves, she'd see the snake movie that has a vaguely similar poster, she'd grab Snakes on a Train, rent that for you, and it would be terrible. That's what this looks like because one of the games that has malware included with it is called like Sniper : something or another, and it's like clearly trying to get the people to find it instead of Sniper Elite Resistance, for example, or Sniper Ghost Warrior. I mean, these are games that are just shovelware garbage that are just pushed all the way down on the Steam charts, and like, it's two examples. At a certain point, as easy as it is to kind of criticize these companies who are having these storefronts like Valve, and I'm not deck riding them here, but like, you gotta have some consumer awareness, man. Like, look at the games you're buying. If you see a game with these asset flip graphics and it's called like Sniper Man of Medan or something like that, you probably shouldn't buy it, especially if it's like a cheaper game and you don't see any user reviews on it. Like, it only has 5 or 10 user reviews. An alarm bell would go off in my head. Like, the common sense machine would turn on in my brain and say, maybe I shouldn't buy this game because it might have malware in it. Like, I get that kids are on the platform too and they make mistakes. Like, come on, are we really doing this? 2 games on Steam have malware and now we want the whole platform to change. I don't know. I can't get worked up about this, guys. I'm sorry. Like, if it happens to the first Berserker or something like that, then call me, because then I'll be mad. Often wrong, could be wrong. I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. But yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. As always, guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.